today, I'd like to introduce our very own Troy Elkins. Troy is our museum registrar here at the Eisenhower Presidential Library. And he received his undergraduate degree from Texas A&M University and a master's degree in history from Kansas State. He served in the Marine Corps from 1994 to 1998 with the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, and he is currently a PhD candidate at Kansas State University. He's studying education and doctrine development in the Marine Corps between World War I and World War II. So please join me in welcoming Troy Elkins.
Thank you, Don, for the introduction and for allowing me to speak today. I'd also like to thank the Eisenhower Presidential Library and Museum for throwing this together and allowing us to meet and talk about topics we all enjoy. Also, would like to say thank you to the Eisenhower Foundation for providing the food and the moral and monetary support to make programs like this happen. Meredith and her crew has done an excellent job, and they continue to impress us every day. I'd also like to thank my coworkers for putting up with me prattling about this subject for years on end, and finally making me have to stand up and talk about it. So many of y'all are wondering, well, who is Pete Ellis? If you're not from Pratt, and if you're not a Marine, you're probably never would have heard of him. He's considered a legend in the Marine Corps. He's an alcoholic, he's an intellectual, he had a tendency to work himself to the point of exhaustion where he would have to be hospitalized. He's an excellent planner, a capable leader, a spy, and most of all, he was the prophet of the amphibious doctrine for the Marine Corps. He was born in Iuka, Kansas, which right outside of Pratt, in 1880. His family moved around a little bit and decided to settle back in Iuka. He went to elementary school there and then graduated, as a rare occasion back in 1900, top of his class at Pratt High School. He was a prolific reader, and much like someone else we talk about a lot around here, he loved baseball. In September 1900, he enlisted in the Marine Corps. So what kind of Marine Corps was he going into? Oh, there it is. So life in the Marines back then was much different than what you think of the Marine Corps today. The size of it was vastly different. There was only 187 officers, a little over 5,000 enlisted. When you enlisted, you had the opportunity to do 3 jobs in the Marine Corps. You were going to be a detachment on a ship, which means you're providing guards for the ship and manning some of the secondary guns. You'll also be tasked to go ashore in some island someplace and quiet things down a little bit as needed. The other is service in the field, expeditionary units, thrown together from everybody to go to these little islands when it really got exciting to calm them down. Or you were part of what was known as the fledgling Advanced Base Force. And the Advanced Base Force had one duty. It was to go out to an island and build a naval base. Ellis did pretty well that first year and a half he's in. He gets promoted to corporal, and then he gets selected to go and become an officer. Within a year and a half, in December 1901, he is commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant and sent to the Philippines. Now, in those days, much different, like today, much different, there was no MOS, there's no specialties. You did it all. And a Marine officer was expected to be able to do artillery, drill infantry, build engineering works, and do it all. And do it quickly, efficiently, and score high marks on all of it. So, Pete gets sent to Cavite, Philippines as his first duty station. He's there about 2 years, mostly just drilling troops. This is a few years after the main part of the Philippine insurrection has settled down. So they're still patrolling, trying to keep things from getting out of hand the way it did in 1900 and 1901. He's there a couple of years, and a chance opportunity pops up. The USS Kentucky battleship has pulled into port. The Marine Detachment Commander is due to rotate home. So he goes up and says, I'll be your detachment commander. Takes over, and they sign off on it. They like him, so he signs off on it. So he gets to spend the next few years rolling around the world, basically, because Kentucky goes all the way back over to the Atlantic side. His detachment, about 75 Marines, is in charge of the 6-inch batteries, which are the secondary guns, and performs quite well. Once he's done on the Kentucky, he gets a couple assignments he really doesn't care for. Becomes a quartermaster at Mare Island, which is Northwest Pacific. Absolutely hated that job. Most people would. And then he spends a few years as a recruiter in Oakland and Des Moines, Iowa. So from there, he gets sent back to the next great duty station. He goes back to the Philippines. He starts out as the adjutant for the 2nd Marine Regiment, which the adjutant back then was the one that did all the personnel work, but also was in charge of making plans for the unit. And this is where Ellis starts getting a taste of what's to come in his life. One of the things they have him do is take charge of a Marine company, and they go out and install 6-inch naval guns on the top of this hill right here. They have to drag these ashore from a Navy ship. That was a secondary battery off a Navy ship. They have to get them ashore, build the rail line, and haul them up. They haul them up and put them in place at night. It wasn't enough of a challenge to do all this by hand. They had to make it even harder. Performs outstandingly well, but he spends so much time in the water dragging the guns ashore and out in the sun working on the track and everything that he ends up in the hospital for the first time with mental and physical exhaustion. So he stays in the Philippines until about 1911, and he asks, well, I'd like to try aviation duty. This is a new concept. Of course, flight only taking place a few years prior. The Marines had really not explored an idea of what to do with aircraft. Instead, he is sent to the Naval War College. And this is where he gets his first real taste of strategy, planning, and what role this is going to play in the future for the Marine Corps. He ends up writing a series of papers that details a possible war with Japan and how the U.S. Navy would fight it and what role the Marine Corps would play in that. And one of the most telling statements is, at the start of this war, Japan's going to have free reign. They're going to control the sea until we can get our fleet together and come after them. For that short time, we have to make the most of what we have, and then we have to figure out where we go from there. He does so well at the Naval War College that they ask him to stay on another year as an instructor. I mean, you're now talking about the rarity of a man who has graduated high school but never went to college, where he is now surrounded by Annapolis Naval Academy graduates at the War College. His next assignment, he gets sent on intelligence gathering, basically doing some recon on Culebra Island, Puerto Rico, for a landing exercise. Performs quite well there, and they say, all right, you've done a great job. Naval War College is asking you to be a part of this joint Army board, and we're going to send you to Guam. Now, there's a specific reason why he's getting sent to Guam. War Plan Orange, that everyone here has heard about, is probably at this point about 4 or 5 years old. And the whole idea of War Plan Orange at that point was, if Japan attacks us, the first thing we have to do is go protect Manila, and then we can go and take out the Japanese Navy wherever we want to. Well, to do this, they would need a forward staging area, and they thought Guam would be the ideal place. So he is sent with the Army and the Navy, all three, to evaluate Guam as the possibility of building a deep water port capable of housing the entire fleet in prior to combat. They get there and spend about a year and a half, 2 years going over the grounds, checking everything, and realize that Guam is not a suitable place. You can't dredge it enough, you can't get enough ships in it to protect it. Again, this will be in the back of his mind later on once after World War I's over. We're going to jump here to that. While he is there, he is ordered to return home, but he makes a little side trip. At the time, there was a U.S. Naval Hospital, U.S. Naval facilities at Yokohama, and he goes and stays there awaiting transport home and starts talking to some Japanese officers, and they say, hey, we're going over to Tsingtao, and we're going to go look at some fortifications the Germans had that we've eliminated. At the start of World War I, Germany had several islands under their control in the Pacific, and they had a legation in Tsingtao. And the British were really concerned about that because the Germans were going to use these islands to do commerce raiding against the British. And so they asked the Japanese could you eliminate all the Germans in the Pacific? And every island that was held by the Germans ends up getting captured. The Germans basically destroyed all their own equipment and went into capture. Shortly after here, he returns back to Quantico, or actually Washington Naval Yard, where he becomes the aide de camp to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. And this is where the pre-war buildup kicks in, and the Marine Corps jumps up to about 350 officers, about 10,000 Marines, so it doubles in size. Ellis at this point is a captain and gets promoted to major because of this, and then sent to headquarters Marine Corps, where now he is planning how the Marine Corps is going to conduct the war once it starts. While he's doing this, he takes advantage of this new great journal that's just come out, the Marine Corps Gazette. And this was the professional journal of the Marine Corps. It still is today. The very second issue of it, Major John Russell puts out a deal. We're the Marines, but we have no mission. All we do is what the Navy tells us to do. And this sparks a huge argument. The whole issue is about 3 ads, the rest of it, all these officers arguing with each other. And Ellis responds like, we do have a mission. It's to support the Navy. And by doing that, the Navy has to communicate to us what their goals are. Once we know the goals of the Navy, we know our mission, we build our doctrine. Puts this in the back of his mind as World War I starts and draws the U.S. in. He trains officers at Quantico. He's recalled to the Chief of Naval Operations to actually help the Navy plan some of their operations of getting bases set aside in France. While he's there, he's selected by Brigadier General Lejeune to accompany him to France to become his adjutant no matter what outfit he gets attached to. So he's going to France to actually plan the battles the Marines will be fighting in. Now at this point, 1918, the Marine Corps is up to about 2,500 officers, 72,000 men, 72,000 enlisted. So it is more than tenfold its size than it was when he enlisted. While he's in France, he's attached to the 4th Brigade staff, and he helps plan several battles you might recognize. The Meuse-Argonne offensive, most notably, he is credited for his planning on the attack on Mount Blanc, which was a mountain that the Germans had captured at the very start of the war and spent the entire war reinforcing. The French had attacked it multiple times and just been devastated every time. The Marines, in one attack, eliminated that and opened the way for an offensive to keep penetrating in deeper into German territory. For that, he receives the Navy Cross and the French Cross de la Guerre. So, by the end of the war, he's promoted to lieutenant colonel. And this is actually, anytime you see a picture of him, this is the photo you see, because this is just a great photo of the guy. He stays around in Germany most of 1919 doing occupation duty, gets sent back to the U.S., and he's there for a very short time. They tell him, okay, you're going to go to Pratt. Go ahead and go back to Pratt. Go on leave. But before you come back here, why don't you go a little side trip? Go down to Galveston and go down to Mexico and take a look around. What's going on down there? What are they doing? And part of this stems from the fact that Mexico had been extremely unstable since 1914. They'd gone through about 10 different governments. And there was concern about the nationalizing of natural resources down there and mineral rights. And so there was some concern if U.S. companies were going to lose their business investments in there. At the same time, the Marine Corps is going through a question. The question is, what now? What do we become? We've proven that we can stand up to one of the toughest armies in the world. We prove that we're capable of sustaining in battle. What do we do now? And so there was a group of Marines saying, well, we're just going to go back to what we're doing. We're going to ride around on ships. We're going to act as the police force. We're going to, anytime we have some trouble in the Caribbean or the Pacific, we can go and just kind of keep it calm and quiet. And then you have a group saying, no, there's something bigger that we've got to figure out, and we're going to be called to do in a short period. And they hadn't quite figured this out yet. After Mexico, Ellis is sent to Santo Domingo, and he actually works with one of the Marine brigades down there, helping try to rebuild the Dominican Republic's government and get it well on its feet where it's actually functioning and not a place of possible insurrection. He's there a very short time, and he asks, can I go on another intel mission? All I want to do, just go to South America and then go over to the Pacific. I'm going to submit my resignation, but I won't date it. I'll travel in civilian attire. I just want to see what's going on. And the Marine Corps signs off on it and sends it to Office of Naval Intelligence, who say, well, we'll use your services, but right now we're just going to use it to plan and look at some of the stuff we have to evaluate it. You're not ready for a mission yet. And so he's denied going on his little adventure. In this time, he actually writes what is called Plan 712, Advanced Based Operations in Micronesia. Finishes writing in about April. By July, the Marine Corps has already reviewed it. The Commandant of the Marine Corps, John A. Lejeune, says this is what we're going to do. This is now our mission. So, what's the advanced based operations in Micronesia? It's how we're going to impose our will on the Japanese. We have to project our fleet, and to do that, we have to have ports and harbors to get them there into the fight. So, Ellis lays out this just real basic plan. You're going to approach the beach at dark. You're going to attack at dawn. You're going to do a very rapid ship-to-shore movement. Naval gunfire and aviation are going to isolate the battlefield. We'll land in waves. The battle will be over at the beach. We win at the beach. This is going to only happen if there's massive amounts of logistics training, rehearsing by the Marines that are going to be responsible for carrying this out, and this has to occur in peacetime as well as in war. As this, he also points out in Micronesia, these were a plan to go right up the middle. You have to start at the Marshall Islands, eliminate them. Once they're gone, you go into the Carolina Islands and reduce those. And finally, the last islands, Palau and Palalo, and you now have isolated Japan from the Pacific Ocean effectively. So this is all going on. There is a lot happening right here between 1919 and 1921, 1922 when this is put out. So the Treaty of Versailles, everybody's of course heard of that, takes a bunch of islands. These islands, let's see. Oh. These islands right here, these were all held by the Germans prior to World War I. They become what is known as the Japanese Mandate. The Treaty of Versailles gives these islands to Japan. They're to use them, protect them. I'll go back here just a second. Shortly after Treaty of Versailles, July 1921, Plan 712, Micronesia is published. Between July 1921 and September 1922, War Plan Orange is being updated. And the update is no longer drive straight to the Philippines. There's going to be a little bit more cautious route to this. And then in February 1922, you have probably the most significant thing arrive, which was the signing of the Washington Naval Treaty. This treaty was signed between United States, Great Britain, Japan, France, and Italy. The three major players, Japan, United States, and Great Britain. It limited the number of ships, and it also said you cannot, in the Pacific, reinforce your islands. You cannot build port facilities. They have to remain as they are for at least the next 10 years. Now, why is this important? Well, for Ellis, what that does, initially, the whole idea was you build the, and I did it again. The whole idea was you build up the fleet at Honolulu and you run for the Philippines. Guam is right there. So all these islands right here that now Japan owns they've flanked basically the Philippines and Hawaii. This is Great Britain, this is France, and Australia and New Zealand control this area. So what Ellis had proposed was, okay, you build up the fleet at Hawaii and you can come down here and you start working these islands. And you basically, once you get to about here, you've got all of Japan just open for your taking. That you can wait and eliminate them as they come to you. Okay, so prior to the mandates, with Germany controlling this, there was a concern. If the United States had to go that route, they would be attacking friendly or neutral nations. In some ways, the Washington Naval Treaty made this easier. All these were now Japanese possessions. If they had to go to war, they could attack them without incurring the wrath of another nation. So Ellis turns in Plan 712 about April, and all this is happening without him around. He kind of disappears. Well, first he sends a letter to headquarters of the Marine Corps. I'm going to take some leave. I want to go to Belgium, Germany, France. I want to kind of tour around there and see what I missed when I was fighting. And it's signed off on, and he goes on leave. However, he does not go to France. He does not go to Belgium. He does not go to Germany. He goes the opposite direction. He goes to Australia. He gets a pseudo identity as a vendor looking for copra, which is reduced down coconut husk, and starts trying to get permission by the Japanese to enter the islands in Micronesia that are under their control, because they have said basically no Westerners are allowed here. He believes these islands are being reinforced. He wants to look at the islands, he wants to do some mapping, do some reconnaissance work, and then report back. He has a lot of difficulty getting to these islands. He comes down to Australia, tries to get visas so he can get in. They deny him visas, and he keeps trying. When he finally does get a visa, he realizes there's no way to get from Australia to Micronesia without having to go to Japan first. While this is going on, he's having reoccurring bouts with his alcoholism. He is drinking a lot. He's ending up in the hospital multiple times, being treated for kidney problems and for alcoholism. He goes from Australia back to the Philippines. He gets sick and ends up in a hospital there. And a Marine officer just happens to walk by, recognize him, and makes him go to the Naval Hospital in Cavite. He's treated, he leaves there and goes to Yokohama. Within 2 months of being in Yokohama, he's in the hospital 3 times for alcoholism. The third time, Headquarters Marine Corps says, "You're done, come home." He checks himself out of the hospital, goes and gets a bank draft for $1,000 and hops on a freighter south. First stop, he gets on a freighter to Saipan, ends up there, and comes down to Palau, and then he goes through all these islands. And you recognize some of the names: Truk, Palau, Kwajalein. There's Tarawa down here. He goes through all these islands. He's making maps. He's looking for fortifications. He's being followed by the Japanese security police. They've already figured him out because he's been drinking so much he's talking about his mission. Finally, he comes back to Palau. He's there about 3 months. Ends up getting married, living in a house with her family. His family's trying to hide the alcohol from him. And he has friends in town that's always bringing it to him. He gets drunk enough one day that he just doesn't come back out. He dies a short time. He dies on May 23rd, or May 1923, and is buried there. So he was never around to see what the influence he had. And there's a lot of intrigue that went on with this, but that's for a different time. So the State Department gets this strange letter. Hey, we've got this guy that was working for this company that died on our island. What do you want us to do with it? And just so happens somebody at the State Department recognizes the guy's name and sends it to the Office of Naval Intelligence, and a whole big quandary just blows up out of it. This is the hospital that he was in several times in Yokohama. So meanwhile, while he's out gallivanting around the Pacific, the Marine Corps is trying to figure this out. How do we implement Plan 712? Between this and War Plan Orange, the mission of the Marine Corps has been clarified. Now they have to build this doctrine around it. The Washington Naval Treaty, the Treaty of Versailles, they're all working together, and it's making sure the Marine Corps has an existence. Well, General Lejeune comes out by saying the primary war mission of the Marine Corps is to supply a mobile force to accompany the fleet for operations on shore in support of the fleet. That's our mission. So straight from Plan 712, straight from what Ellis had previously argued in his journal exchanges. So how are we going to do this? Well, they start having fleet exercises. They do exercises in 1922, 24, and 25, and they got to figure this out because they don't have the equipment. This is what they call a beetle boat, and they're trying to roll a cannon off of it. The only thing is, now this boat's ashore, they can't get it off until tide comes back in. They're like motorized launches. They were using whale boats. Basically, you run up, beach it, and jump off the side and hope maybe that it'll float out on its own. So there was no way to get repeated waves in and out in a timely manner. You have some commitments come up. Insurrection in Nicaragua. Some more fairs down in Mexico and other parts in the Caribbean. And then you have one of the oddest things happen ever. The U.S. mail was getting stolen and robbed so many times that they put the Marines in charge of securing the U.S. mail. Their armed Marines are escorting mail across the United States. So all these events are happening at the same time, and suddenly the Marine Corps is like, we don't have enough guys. We can't do all of this, and we don't have time to put a team together to do these exercises. So the exercises stop. Then the Depression hits. The exercises really stop. The only place left that this is being discussed, talked about, and trying to work out is in the Marine Corps schools. Now this is James Carson Breckinridge. He was in charge of the Marine Corps schools from starting about 1932 to 1936. That was his second time around. While he is there, a document's produced, and it's called the Tentative Manual for Landing Operations. Basically, it took Plan 712 and it blew it up. It filled in all the logistics, it filled in all the capabilities, how they were going to do this, organization, everything. The Navy looks at it, we can use that. Navy turns around and turns it into Fleet Publication 167 in 1938. You have landing operations resumed starting in 1933. The largest one is in 1935, where you have 2,700 Marines, about 800 Army soldiers participate in it. These are small operations, but they're big in the fact that no one knows how to do this, and they're putting this together as they go. So by the time World War I or World War II comes in, the U.S. has got a pretty good idea of what it's doing with amphibious operations. The Army's had some experience with it too, because they've been in on some of the exercises. And they also, for all the inter-service rivalries there are, the one thing that does not stop is all the services will pilfer each other's information. They will go through and they take what's there and they'll make it work for them. Air Force does it, Marine Corps does it, Navy does it, Army does it. Because that's what it's about, is making this work so we get the same goal. So in the end, with Plan 712 and taking in Micronesia, this was a decade of planning to see, almost 2 decades of planning to see if this mission would be required and if it would work. Well, the end results are pretty much unanimous. It was costly, but it worked. At the Battle of Tarawa, the ideas that Pete Ellis put forward proved exactly correct. That battle was won on the beach in a matter of hours. All that was left was cleanup. After that, the Japanese never defended a beach itself. They defended inland as much as they could. So, what of Pete Ellis's legacy? Today, the Marine Corps Association sponsors an essay contest for forward thinking in the Marine Corps. What are they going to do in the future? What challenges do we have? Ellis Hall is named after Pete Ellis, and it is the hall where Marine Corps students officers go to learn amphibious warfare. And then you have, in Pratt, Kansas, the Ellis VFW post. His name is uttered in every class that is taught to the Marines, enlisted and officer, about amphibious warfare. As I said, if you're not from Pratt, if you're not from the Marine Corps, you don't know him. But now y'all do. Anybody have any questions?
When you said that one area that was held by the Germans,
Yes, ma'am.
trying to go through there, without upsetting them, how would you have done that without upsetting them?
That's just it. That was the issue. Was the whole catch to War Plan Orange at that point was there is no way, unless these German islands are either allied with us or against us, there is no way to go through there without causing major issues. That's the reason why they were saying we shoot for Guam and hopefully we can build up Guam and then use it to prevent any actions against the Philippines and to attack Japan. Now, what I did not mention was this was a far-fetched idea considering how well Japan had been able to handle that when the Russians tried something like that a few years prior. They basically knocked out 2 Russian fleets in a matter of about 2 months. Well, a little bit longer than that, I believe, but they completely eliminated the Russian fleets because they had tried basically the same thing.
My uncle was killed in British or Dutch New Guinea, World War II.
Yes, ma'am?
And that was down.
Yes, that would have been down here. So this is another reason. This was one part of the plan, and then you end up with the southern route as well, and that's to protect New Zealand and Australia, and also to make sure you can kind of get through here to protect the British in India. War Plan Orange was a limited scope. They thought is going to be 2 reasons that we would have to do this. That the Japanese were going to try to take over the open door policy in China and conquer all of China, or that we were going to lose the Philippines to Japan. So it was anticipated originally that this was going to be your area of war. When it exploded the way it did and the capabilities of Japan proved that they could make it clear down to about there, it changed the game a little bit and they had to alter the plan.
Well, you kind of just answered my question, which was why after World War I was Japan considered such a threat that there were so many plans built to try to defend from them?
Yep. It wasn't just after World War I, it was actually prior to World War I. Japan was, after Japan defeated Russia in that war, the only other navy that U.S. thought could give it a problem was the Great Britain. And the odds of those two going to war is not probable, but we did have plans for that too. And it's, there's actually Army War College and Army Staff College problems working on what to do when the Japanese land and take over California. And those were written prior, one of them, the War College one was written prior to World War I, and the Army Staff College was done 1920 or 1921.
I've never heard of it.
Okay, War Plan Orange is just a color coding. Basically, how do you name war plans? Well, you want to name them so that you know what they are, but the enemy, if they ever hear about it, they don't know what you're talking about. So orange was Japan. So War Plan Orange was, what are we going to do when we go to war with Japan? And it goes through multiple reiterations from about 1907 up until World War II.
So how did the air support aspect change with Ellis's plan with the development of flight technology in the 1930s? Because I knew during the 1930s, that's when we got the Warhawk. I think that's what it was called, right?
That was a big development. When he was talking air support, he was talking float planes, light planes coming off of capital ships to do reconnaissance, maybe some harassment bombing. By the time 1930s roll around, there's this sudden realization that, well, carriers can do a little bit more. And by 38, carriers can do a lot. And that was every time a new capability was discovered, the Marine Corps at the same time in the 30s is updating its air arm. It is equipping itself with the same planes the Navy has, developing tactics that the Navy's using as far as dive bombing. And they make out this great deal with the Navy. It's like, hey, if you help us build our squadrons up, we'll detach a squadron or two to each one of your carrier wings, and that way we can fly from the carriers and protect the fleet that way as well. And this is just a great deal because it provides a little extra income and incentive to the Marine Corps to develop their air capabilities. By the end of the war, the Marine Corps, of course, is known for the best thing it does is close air support.
How was he supporting himself financially when he was on this break from duty going down south? And did he have any other operatives giving him intel on how to get around down there?
He was, with the others giving him intelligence, he was just talking to Western business. There were a few Western businessmen that were there. Japan really restricted who could come in and go out. They did not want a lot of Westerners there, but they also realized for their trade purposes, they did need some there. And he would get in with some people conducting business there, and make their contacts and basically work with them to learn stuff. Now, as the money goes, he was still getting, because he was technically on leave, he was still getting his Marine Corps pay, but there was a little bit of extra money coming in through both the Marine Corps and Office of Naval Intelligence being deposited in an account. And basically, that's how he survived. I mean, the fact that he was able to pull out $1,000 at one time there towards the end is just amazing. So.
This is two questions. Did Eisenhower and Ellis ever interact in World War I? And then the second question is, a lot has been said about some of the mentors that Eisenhower had. I wondered what mentors Ellis had.
Ike and Ellis never would have interacted. They might have known each other by name later on, but there was never a chance for them to interact. Of course, with Ike not getting to France during World War I and being basically isolated. About as close as they were going to come is if Ellis was going to the Philadelphia Naval Yard for something, and with Ike being at Camp Gettysburg, or Camp Colton Gettysburg, that would have been about as close as those two would have come during that time period. As far as mentors, there's not much said about Ellis's mentors. He doesn't mention them much. He had a real good close relationship with General Lejeune, who was his superior and older. Several of his, when he was younger, several of the big names, Hiram Barris, who was known as Hiram Hiram because he liked to just go out and walk for miles at a time, helped guide him and teach him on stuff. And he always got, when he was with these guys, he got really good marks and reports. It was only a few times that he did not, and that was basically because he stood up to somebody that was acting unfairly. Namely, at one point in time, he and the governor of Guam got into it, and it kind of it reflected poorly on his next evaluations.
Where is Ellis's body interred?
So I believe he is buried in Pratt. His body never made it home. This is part of the intrigue. So the Navy sends a corpsman to go pick him up, or pick up his remains. Of course, he's been dead for a couple of months in the Pacific, so they go ahead and no, not embalm. I'm sorry, cremate him. The corpsman brings him back to the naval base, or the Naval Hospital in Yokohama, and he's in a near catatonic state when he gets back. They're wanting to ask him questions, what was going on down there, what was the condition of the body, what did he see, and he's unable to talk. And within a couple of days, when he starts to come around where he can actually talk, there is a massive earthquake in Yokohama that collapses the hospital, it kills him, and it buries the ashes of Ellis. This is the intrigue. This causes an investigation that goes on until the 1960s to figure out if the Japanese actually poisoned Ellis or if he drank himself to death. Yeah.
Troy, what was the source of all the records that you used?
Okay, yes. For the photos, those mostly come from the U.S. Marine Corps History Division. They were excellent. I called them, say, hey, I need some photos, and say, well, we just put these online. Here you go. And for the personal records, I went through the NARA National Personal Records Center in St. Louis. This is actually a digitized collection. His record book is about 500 some odd pages long. About the first 200 of it is his actual record when he's alive. The rest of it all deals with the investigation after he dies, and trying to get the family taken care of, and trying to explain to the chief of naval operations why we had a Marine over acting like a civilian that was not in a condition to be doing this. The other one is a lot of the background information comes from a very excellent, well-written book, and there will never be one to top it. It's written by Dirk Bellendorf, and it's called Simply Pete Ellis. And he started out he heard about Pete Ellis, when he was in Micronesia working with the Peace Corps. And he spent years tracking down people. He got to interview people that knew him on Palau, met his wife, and got to meet all these people and interview them before they passed away in the early 70s. So this collection that he wrote, by far, if you want to read something that just tells you everything you want to know about him, that's the book to go for.
I think we'll take one more question.
Did he marry a native girl, and did he have any children?
So it is unclear if he actually married the native girl or if it was just one of the coincidental, convenient living together type situations. They weren't there. He wasn't there long enough for any kids. He did have a couple of girlfriends, but he never married.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank y'all.